Homeless veteran asked for work, not money. The manager smirked. Until 550, Harleys saluted. Mason Reed didn't walk into the dealership to beg. He walked in to work. The bell over the glass door chimed polite, like it belonged to a place where people never slept in their clothes. Heat rushed over him, carrying the smell of new leather, tire shine, and expensive coffee. Outside it was February cold, the kind that turns your breath into a warning. Inside, the floor shone like a mirror, and the lights made every chrome detail sparkle. To his left, a row of motorcycles sat on display stands like trophies, paint so deep it looked wet, handlebars gleaming, price tags hanging like little insults. Above them, a banner stretched across the wall, Freedom Ride. This Saturday, support our heroes, cameras, smiles, flags, everything neat and staged. Mason paused long enough to wipe his boots on the mat. The soles were worn thin. His jacket, olive, frayed at the cuffs, hung heavy with rain that hadn't fully dried. He kept his shoulders straight anyway, the way a man does when pride is the last thing he owns. His eyes drifted to a clear acrylic donation box on the counter. Vance Cares, Veterans Fund. Inside were crisp bills, folded just so, like even the generosity was curated. Behind a curved desk that looked more like a bank counter than a reception, a woman in a fitted blazer glanced up. Her smile appeared automatically, then faltered when her eyes took him in. "Can I help you?" she asked, voice still sweet but cautious now. Mason nodded once. "I'm looking for the service manager, or whoever handles hiring." Her gaze flicked to the wall behind him. A huge poster showed a grinning mechanic and a flag. "We hire heroes," it promised in bold letters. Underneath, smaller text, "Ask about our veteran opportunities." Mason followed her eyes, then looked back at her like he wanted to believe the poster was real. "I'm a vet," he said. "I can start today, anything you've got." "Cleaning, moving inventory, sweeping bays. I'm not asking for money up front, just work." The woman's mouth tightened. She started to say something, then stopped, like she was weighing how to call security without making it obvious. Instead, she glanced down the showroom. A man stepped out from a glass office with his sleeves rolled just enough to show a watch that probably cost more than Mason's whole life right now. He had perfect hair, perfect teeth, and the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. Derek Vance. He looked Mason up and down like he was appraising a dented trade-in. "What's this?" Derek asked, loud enough for the nearest customers to hear. The receptionist leaned closer to him and murmured. Derek didn't look away from Mason. Mason held his hands open, palms visible. No threat, no angle. "Sir, I'm here for work. I saw your sign. I can do labor. I've got experience with engines and—" Derek's smile widened into a smirk. "You got experience with showers?" A couple near the bike snorted. The man laughed into his sleeve like he'd been waiting for something entertaining. An older guy in a faded ball cap that read Vietnam Veteran shifted uncomfortably by a display of chrome helmets, eyes flicking between Mason and the floor like he wanted to disappear from his own conscience. Mason didn't flinch. The heat in his face didn't show. He swallowed once. "I can earn a day's pay and get cleaned up. I just need a chance." Derek leaned back against the desk, casual, confident, like the building itself belonged to him, and Mason was an annoying stain he could wipe away with one hand. "Listen," Derek said, drawing the word out. "This is Vance Motors. We sell premium. We service premium. People come here because it's safe, clean, professional. We don't—" he waved vaguely. "We don't do charity cases in the lobby." "I'm not asking for charity," Mason said. His voice stayed even, but there was something steel under it. "I'm asking to work." Derek's eyes flicked to the W.E. Hire Heroes poster again, then back to Mason, amused. "That sign is for real veterans." Mason's jaw tightened. "I am a real veteran." "Oh yeah?" Derek stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to make it sound like he was being reasonable. "Then you'll have no problem proving it. What unit? What MOS? Where'd you serve?" Every head within 10 feet turned. It was a trap dressed as small talk. If Mason answered wrong, Derek would laugh. If Mason answered right, Derek would still laugh, because it wasn't about the truth. It was about watching a man struggle to keep his dignity. Mason stared at Derek for a long second. He could feel the weight of eyes, the judgment, the quiet hunger for drama. He breathed in. "Respectfully, sir, that's not something I owe the room. I can show paperwork if you need it. I can show you I'm capable. I just need work." Derek straightened, mock offended. "So you can't answer. Got it." "I didn't say that." "You didn't say anything useful." Derek's voice snapped back to loud again. "Ma'am," he said to the receptionist without looking at her, "call security. We're not running a shelter." The word shelter landed like a slap. The couple whispered to each other, faces bright with that guilty excitement people get when someone else's humiliation becomes entertainment. Someone's phone tilted up just slightly, recording. Mason saw it and chose not to react. He could have gotten angry. He could have shouted. He could have done what desperate men do when they feel cornered. Instead, he nodded once, as if Derek had simply told him the service bay was closed. "All right," Mason said quietly. "I understand." That calmness irritated Derek more than any outburst would have. "You understand?" Derek scoffed. "Good. Then understand this too. If you come back, we'll have you trespassed. You hear me?" Mason looked past Derek, past the bright showroom, to the service doors in the back where mechanics moved like shadows behind glass. For a split second the doors swung open and he saw the inside. A lift up with a truck half raised, a slick sheen on the concrete that shouldn't be there, a red fuel can sitting too close to a space heater. A small thing. The kind of small thing that turns into a funeral if nobody takes it seriously. He looked back at Derek. "Someone's going to get hurt here if you keep ignoring safety," he said, almost under his breath. Derek's smirk faltered for half a second. "Excuse me?" Mason didn't elaborate. He didn't point. He didn't accuse. He just turned slightly toward the hallway like he'd seen something that mattered more than Derek's ego. A security guard appeared from nowhere, tall and wide, black polo with security stitched over his chest. He put a hand on Mason's shoulder, not gentle. "Time to go," the guard said. Mason didn't resist. He didn't swing. He didn't even shrug the hand off. He simply stepped forward so the guard's grip slid from shoulder to upper arm, steering him like a problem being removed. The receptionist stared at her keyboard. A salesman stared at a line in the floor. The Vietnam vet stared at his own hands. Nobody met Mason's eyes. As the guard pushed him toward the door, Derek walked beside them, enjoying the little parade. "Hey," Derek called out, "since you're so eager to work, tell you what, there's a dumpster out back. You clean it out, I'll give you $20. Mason stopped just inside the doorway. The guard tightened his grip. Derek smiled wider, pleased with himself. "What? That's work. You said you wanted work." Mason turned his head slowly. "Keep your 20, he said. The showroom went quiet, like everyone was waiting for the homeless guy to do something stupid, for the story they could tell later, for the moment they could justify in their heads. Mason didn't give it to them. He stepped out into the cold. Before we continue, tell us in the comments where you are watching this from, because the kind of place that hangs a "We Hire Heroes" sign while kicking a veteran back into the freezing rain, that kind of place exists in more towns than people want to admit. The door swung shut behind him with a soft, final click that sounded too polite for what had just happened. Outside, the wind bit through his jacket like it had teeth. Mason stood on the sidewalk, staring at the windows that reflected him back, gaunt, unshaven. He reached into his pocket, not for a handout, not for a cigarette, but for the folded paper that held the last of his proof. It wasn't there. His brow furrowed. He patted the other pocket, then the inside of his jacket. Nothing. Back inside, through the glass, Derek was already laughing with the couple again, shaking his head like he'd just handled a nuisance. Mason turned to leave, choosing the street over pride swallowing. And that's when something small slipped free from the torn seam of his pocket. A coin, scuffed brass, edges worn smooth, hit the tile just inside the doorway and rolled in a slow circle beneath the reception desk, spinning where nobody noticed it at all. Not until the receptionist's chair scooted back an inch. Not until her eyes dropped. Not until her hand hovered over the coin, unsure whether to pick it up. The coin was still wobbling under the reception desk when Derek Vance snapped, "Don't touch whatever he dropped." Katie's hand froze. She'd been reaching for it without thinking, more reflex than curiosity. Derek's voice made it sound contaminated. "It's just a coin," she said. That's the point, Derek replied, already walking away. We don't know where it's been. When he disappeared into his glass office, the showroom went back to normal. Polished smiles, quiet music, people admiring bikes they didn't need. Katie slid her chair back, nudged the coin out with her heel, and scooped it up fast. It wasn't shiny. It felt heavy and old, edges worn smooth. Letters circled the rim, scratched and faded. She started to tilt it toward the light. "Katie," a salesman called, drifting by. "Vance wants the Freedom Ride flyer on the counter." She closed her fist, smiled like nothing happened, and dropped the coin into her desk drawer. The drawer clicked shut, hiding it like a secret she wasn't sure she deserved. Outside, Mason Reed kept walking. He didn't have the luxury of anger. Anger costs energy. Energy costs food. Food costs money. And he was trying hard, stubbornly hard, not to become the man people expected when they looked at him. By dawn, he was at a day labor lot behind a hardware store, standing in a loose line of men with hoodies pulled tight and hands jammed into pockets. A foreman in a reflective vest paced with a clipboard, choosing bodies like he was picking produce. You, the foreman said, pointing fast. Mason stepped forward. "I can lift, I can run tools. I've got mechanical experience. I'll outwork anybody here." The foreman's eyes flicked over his jacket, his boots, the stubble. "Insurance," he said, like it explained everything. "We can't." "It's one day," Mason replied. "Pay me at the end. No paperwork. I just need a start." "Not today." The foreman didn't slow down. The van door slammed, tires rolled, the job vanished. Mason walked until his legs felt hollow. Near a grocery store, an older woman struggled to load cases of bottled water into her trunk. Mason stepped in, lifted them, stacked them carefully. She offered him a $5. Mason shook his head. "Keep it," he said, and walked away before pride could turn into regret. He ended up at the public library and washed his face in the bathroom sink, scrubbing until the cold water stung. He flattened his hair with wet hands and stared at his reflection, trying to look like someone a manager wouldn't dismiss in 1 second. At noon, he tried the temp office. A sign on the door said, "Appointment only." The guard didn't even look apologetic. Mason stood on the sidewalk for a moment, hearing traffic, feeling hunger pinch, and then his mind returned, against his will, to the service bay at Vance Motors. The slick shine on the concrete, the heater, the fuel can. A small mistake waiting to become a headline. He told himself he was only going back for work. He told himself that twice. By late afternoon, he was in front of the dealership again, staring at the banner, "Support our heroes." The words looked clean enough to be true. He went in. The bell chimed, heads turned, the same quick scan, the same silent verdict. Katie was at the desk. Her eyes widened, not alarmed this time, just uneasy, like she'd been thinking about him since yesterday. "I'm sorry," Mason said softly. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need work. I'll stay in the back. You won't see me." Katie glanced toward Derek's office. His silhouette moved behind the glass, pacing on a call, laughing. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "I know, but you have a sign. I'm asking for what it promises." Katie hesitated, then reached under the desk and slid a small bottle of water onto the counter. After a beat, she added a wrapped breakfast sandwich. Mason didn't touch it at first. "I didn't ask for that." "I know," she said. "Take it anyway." He took it with both hands, careful, like it mattered. "Thank you." "What can you do?" Katie asked, voice low. "Anything," Mason said. "Sweep trash, load parts. I can do oil, brakes, electrical. I can—" A door opened. Derek strode out mid-laugh, phone in hand. "Yeah, tell the councilman we'll have bikes lined up for the cameras." He saw Mason. The laugh died instantly. "Well," Derek said, hanging up. The smell came back. Mason held his ground. "I'm here for work." Derek's eyes flicked to the water and sandwich. His gaze cut to Katie. "We feeding strays now?" "It's my lunch," Katie said quickly. Derek turned back, smile sharpening. "You want work so bad? Fine. There's a detail bay out back. A trade-in from a farm. It's disgusting. You clean it top to bottom, I'll give you 60. Katie's face tightened. "Derek," Mason cut in before she could. "I'll do it. Derek's smile widened. Before close, and if it's not perfect, you get nothing. Simple. Where is it? Mason asked. Derek pointed toward the side door. Back. Don't talk to customers, don't touch the bikes, and if anything goes missing, it's on you. Mason pushed through into the service area. The detail bay sat at the far end behind hanging plastic strips. A mud-caked SUV waited under harsh lights, interior stained, trash shoved into the footwells, windows filmed with grime. The smell hit him like a shove, rotting feed mixed with wet carpet. He looked for supplies. There were none. A cloudy bucket, one rag, no gloves, no cleaner. A young tech walked by, saw him staring, and quietly set a pair of thin nitrile gloves on a toolbox without a word. Then, an older mechanic barked, "Don't get involved!" and the kid flinched away like he'd been burned. Mason pulled the gloves on anyway. He worked. He hauled trash out by the armful, scraped mud off the mats, wiped the dash inch by inch, pulled the seats forward and reached under them for whatever had been ground into the carpet. His shoulders burned, his fingers cramped. He kept going, because quitting would prove Derek right. Halfway through, he noticed the same red fuel can he'd seen yesterday, still too close to the heater, still in the path where someone would bump it without thinking. He slid it back with his boot, farther from the heat, then kept scrubbing like it was nothing. Hours later, the SUV looked not new, but respectable. The windows were clear. The seats were wiped down. The floor wasn't a swamp anymore. Mason washed his hands until the water ran brown, then walked back to the showroom, exhausted and steady. He didn't eat the sandwich. Not yet. He'd learned to save what you can. Derek was leaning on the counter with two salesmen, laughing at a joke. He stopped when Mason approached. "I'm done," Mason said. "You said 60. Derek's eyes traveled over Mason's grime-smeared sleeves, like that was the only thing that mattered. "Not to our standard." "You didn't give me supplies," Derek shrugged. "Not my problem." Mason's jaw tightened. "You said 60, in front of her." Derek's smile turned lazy. "I said I'd pay if it was perfect." "It is," Mason said. "Go look." Derek didn't move. "Get out." Mason didn't raise his voice. "Pay me." Derek leaned in, voice low and venomous. "You don't get to negotiate with me. You don't get to stand in my showroom and demand anything." Katie stood behind the desk, frozen. Her hand hovered near the phone, not knowing who to call in a world where managers always win. Mason looked at Derek like he was looking at a broken part that couldn't be fixed. "Then you're not hiring heroes," he said quietly. "You're decorating with them." Derek's face hardened. "Security!" The guard appeared fast, gripping Mason's arm like he'd been waiting for it. Mason turned his head slightly toward Katie. "Thanks for the water," he said, quiet. Katie's throat bobbed. She couldn't speak. Derek leaned close enough that only Mason could hear. "Come back again and I'll make sure you don't leave with both legs." Mason's eyes stayed calm. "You should thank me for moving that fuel can," he murmured back. Derek's pupils tightened. For a split second, the smirk cracked, like Mason had touched a nerve he shouldn't know existed. "What did you say?" Derek snapped louder, for the room. Mason didn't repeat it. The guard shoved him toward the door. Cold air rushed in as the glass swung open. People watched like it was a show. Outside, Mason's boot hit the sidewalk hard. He stepped away, then finally tore open the wrapper and ate the sandwich slowly, standing in the wind, chewing like each bite was a decision to keep going. Across the street, a black SUV sat idling at the curb. A phone lifted behind tinted glass, aimed at him. Inside, Katie's fingers trembled as she opened her desk drawer. The coin sat in the corner like it had been waiting. She picked it up, turned it over, and leaned it into the light. The letters around the rim came into focus, faded, but clear enough to read. A name. Mason Reed. Katie didn't go back to typing. She sat with the coin in her palm, feeling its weight like it was a piece of somebody's spine. It wasn't a collector coin. It wasn't a lucky charm from a casino. It had the dull seriousness of something issued, carried, gripped in sweaty hands, passed between people who didn't have time for speeches. Mason Reed, the engraving read. Under the name, smaller text ringed the edge, faded, but still there. A unit crest in the center, scratched by years of being shoved into pockets, dropped into sand, clenched during nights you weren't sure you'd see morning. She'd seen challenge coins before. Her dad kept one in a shadow box from his years as a firefighter. It meant you belonged somewhere. It meant someone, somewhere, could call you by name and you'd answer. Derek Vance had called him a stray. Katie's fingers curled tighter until the metal pressed a half moon into her skin. Then she slid it into her blazer pocket and forced herself to breathe like the showroom wasn't suddenly too bright. Behind her, Derek's office door shut. His laugh seeped through the glass like a perfume he wore, expensive, fake, lingering long after he left a room. A customer approached the counter with a set of keys. Katie smiled, did her job, took the keys, scheduled the appointment. She was on autopilot, but her mind kept replaying the moment Mason mentioned the fuel can like it was nothing. You should thank me for moving that fuel can. How would he even notice that? As the afternoon thinned into evening, the dealership got busier. A truck rolled into the service lane. Phones rang. Salesmen drifted across the floor with practiced friendliness. Outside, under the lights, mechanics moved like shadows. And overhead, everywhere, the dealership's propaganda smiled back. Flags, posters, banners, Freedom Ride this Saturday, support our heroes. Derek had been building this event for weeks, not because he cared, but because it looked good. A town councilman was coming, a local news station, a handful of sponsors. There would be a ribbon-cutting style moment, a speech, a photo op where Derek would shake a veteran's hand and everyone would applaud the concept of gratitude without touching the mess of it. To Derek, heroes were marketing, clean, polished, convenient. The real ones were liability. In the service bay, the shop foreman, Ray, hung a new schedule board and barked orders. Bays 1 through 4 are stacked tomorrow. No screw-ups. Freedom Ride brings attention, and attention brings audits. Keep it tight. A tech muttered, like he cares about audits. Ray threw a look that shut him up. Derek walked through the service doors like he owned oxygen, clapping his hands together. All right, listen up. Saturday we're putting on a show. Community comes first. Veterans come first. I want this place looking like a postcard. He pointed toward the lifts. We'll have bikes lined up outside. Cameras will sweep through. If anyone asks, you tell them Vance Motors is proud to support our troops. A mechanic wiped his hands on a rag. We got any troops on payroll? Derek's smile stayed, but his eyes went flat. We support them in ways that matter, he said. Now, who's on the donation box count tonight? Katie's head snapped up at the counter. Donation box count? Derek didn't look at her, but his voice carried. We're doing a pre-count so we can announce a number on Saturday. Looks good. Get sponsors excited. Ray, you and Tina do it after close. Ray nodded. Tina, a service writer with sharp eyeliner and sharper loyalty to Derek, nodded too. Katie watched Derek stroll back out into the showroom with his effortless grin. The donation box sat on the counter in plain sight, full of carefully folded bills. Vance Cares. Veterans Fund. Something about the way Derek said pre-count made Katie's stomach tighten. Near closing, the Vietnam vet from yesterday returned. He wandered the showroom like he didn't know why he was there. He paused by the bikes, stared at the banner, then drifted toward the counter. You work here? He asked Katie softly. Yes, sir. He nodded once. That man who came in, the young vet. Katie's throat went dry. Yeah. He okay? The older man asked. His voice carried shame, like he'd meant to speak up yesterday and hadn't been brave enough. Katie glanced toward Derek's office. I don't know, she admitted. The older man exhaled. I didn't like what I saw. Neither did I, Katie said before she could stop herself. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. You think he was telling the truth? Katie's hand touched her blazer pocket instinctively, feeling the coin's shape. Yes, she said. I do. The older man's eyes flicked to her pocket, then away. He didn't push. He just nodded, like that answer settled something in him. My grandson rides, he said. Biker groups, big ones. Katie blinked. Okay. He ever need help? The man swallowed. Those people show up, not for trouble, for family. Katie felt her heartbeat thump once, hard. What's your grandson's name? The older man hesitated, then wrote a name on the back of a receipt. Eli. Tell him Frank sent you. Katie slid the receipt into her drawer, right beside where the coin had been. Thank you, she said. He nodded and left. After close, the showroom lights dimmed, leaving the place looking like a stage after the audience went home. Ray and Tina came up front with the key for the donation box. Tina dumped the bills onto the counter and pretended to organize paperwork. Ray unlocked the box. Tina dumped the bills onto the counter and started stacking them fast, lips moving as she counted. 100, 200, 3. Ray frowned. That's light. Tina shot him a look. What? It was fuller yesterday, Ray muttered. Tina's eyes narrowed. You keeping inventory of the box now? Ray stiffened. Just saying. Tina stacked the bills into a neat pile and wrote a number on a sticky note. She slid it toward Ray like it was the final truth. That's what it is. Ray stared at the stack, then at the box, then at the sticky note. He didn't argue, but something in his jaw tightened. Derek appeared from his office like he'd been listening. All set? He asked. Tina smiled too brightly. Yep, counted and ready. Derek nodded, satisfied, and pocketed the sticky note without reading it in front of anyone. Great, that'll look fantastic on camera. Then his gaze swept the counter and landed, just for a heartbeat, on Katie. You staying late? He asked. Just finishing paperwork, Katie said. Good. Keep this place spotless. Saturday's going to be big. He walked out with Tina. Ray lingered behind a second, looking like he wanted to say something to Katie, but his courage failed him. He turned and followed. Katie waited until the service bay quieted, until the last tool clinked and the last mechanic's footsteps faded. Then she slipped into the bathroom, locked the door, and pulled out her phone. She typed Mason Reed into the search bar, but there were 100 Mason Reeds. No face, no story, no easy explanation. She added veteran and challenge coin. Still nothing she could trust, so she did the only thing she could do. She opened a blank message and sent it to the name on the receipt, Eli. She stared at the screen for a long time before she typed the first line. Hi, you don't know me. Frank gave me your name. I work at Vance Motors. A veteran came in asking for work, not money. My boss humiliated him. He dropped something that belongs to him. Her thumb hovered over send. Her pulse raced like she was about to jump off a cliff. She hit send. Then she stood there in the silent bathroom, listening to the building's hum, and wondered if she'd just made herself a target. Outside, across town, Mason sat on the steps behind a closed laundromat, back against brick, chewing the last of the sandwich slowly. A police cruiser rolled past and didn't stop, but he watched it anyway. He didn't know Katie had his name in her pocket. He didn't know Derek was counting donation money like it was his. He only knew the cold was coming again, and tomorrow he'd have to find work with a body that was getting tired of proving it deserved to exist. And somewhere in the dark, a message buzzed on a stranger's phone. Eli read the words once, then twice. Then he stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. Because he knew that name. Mason Reed wasn't just a vet. Mason Reed was the man who dragged him out of a burning vehicle overseas when everyone else thought the convoy was dead. Eli's hands started shaking as he typed back. Where is he now? Eli didn't wait for a second text. He was already moving, boots on, keys in hand, jacket half-zipped as he crossed the room. The house around him was quiet except for the thud of his steps and the low buzz of his phone. He typed while walking, thumb hitting wrong letters because his hands wouldn't stop shaking. Send me a picture of what he dropped. Katie read the message at the counter with her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She hesitated, then pulled the coin out of her blazer pocket, held it under the desk lamp, and snapped a photo. Name side, crest side, scratches and all. She sent it. The reply came almost instantly. That's his. Where is he? Katie swallowed. I don't know exactly. He was here today. He left after Derek refused to pay him. Eli typed back, slower now, like he was forcing himself not to explode through the screen. Listen, do not let your boss see you're doing this. If you find out where Mason is, tell me. Also, keep your eyes open. That dealership's veteran event, it's going to matter. Katie stared at the words. Why? The typing bubble popped up, vanished, popped up again. Because men like Derek always pick the wrong guy to humiliate, and because Mason is the reason I can walk. Katie's eyes stung before she understood why. She blinked hard, forced herself back to work mode as a customer returned for a pickup. She smiled. She handed keys over. She said, "Have a great night," like she wasn't sitting on a live wire. When the last customer finally left, Katie locked the front doors and turned off half the showroom lights, leaving the display bikes glowing under spotlights like jewels. The place looked peaceful now. Too peaceful. A temple built for money. She checked the parking lot through the glass. Nothing. Derek's black SUV was gone. The service bay was dark. No movement except the soft flutter of the Freedom Ride banner near the ceiling vent. She should have gone home. Instead, she walked out the side door and crossed to the service area, following a feeling she couldn't name. The detail bay still smelled faintly of disinfectant. The mud-caked SUV that Mason had cleaned earlier sat outside now, looking presentable. On the floor near where he'd been working, she noticed a streak, like someone had dragged a boot through a thin layer of spilled fluid. Katie crouched, touched the concrete with one finger. Her fingertip came up slick. Oil? Gas? She stared toward the corner where the heater sat. The red fuel can was back, closer than it had been earlier. Too close, like someone had shoved it there on purpose, careless or angry, or both. Her stomach tightened. She straightened fast, glanced around, and then, without thinking, moved it back again. Farther. Safer. The way Mason had. As she walked toward the employee exit, she spotted Derek's office door slightly ajar. A sliver of light spilled out. She knew she shouldn't. She approached anyway, steps quiet, and peeked in. Derek's desk was clean except for one thing, a manila envelope half open, cash visible inside. Next to it, a printed spreadsheet with the Vance Motors letterhead, names in a column, numbers beside them. A line highlighted in yellow. Veteran Outreach, donations collected. Katie's breath caught. It wasn't a charity ledger. It looked like a plan. She backed away before the floor could betray her, left the service area, and walked out into the cold night with the coin burning in her pocket like a warning. Across town, Mason Reed sat behind the laundromat and watched steam rise from a vent like it was the closest thing to warmth he was allowed. His fingers were stiff, his knuckles were cracked. He held his hands inside his jacket and kept his spine straight against the brick. He had enough pride to stay upright. He had enough exhaustion to close his eyes. A car rolled by slow on the street, not stopping, just watching. Mason didn't turn his head. He'd learned that some people wanted a reaction more than they wanted the truth. He slept in fragments, 10 minutes here, 15 there, waking every time a door slammed somewhere, every time someone laughed too loud. When dawn arrived, it didn't bring relief. It brought responsibility. Another day of proving he deserved a place in the world. He stood, stretched joints that didn't want to move, and started walking again, because movement kept the cold from settling inside his bones. He didn't go back to the labor lot. He went back to Vance Motors, not because he thought Derek would suddenly grow a conscience, because Mason couldn't shake what he'd seen in that service bay. And because somewhere deep in him, the part that had kept men alive under worse conditions than a freezing sidewalk refused to ignore a hazard just because the people around it were cruel. The bell chimed as he entered. The receptionist wasn't there yet. Katie wasn't either. The showroom was quiet except for a salesman setting up brochures. Mason stepped carefully across the shining floor and stopped near the counter, scanning the place like he was looking for something specific. The donation box sat where it always did. Vance Cares. He turned toward the glass doors leading to the service bay. A voice cut through the quiet. Back again. Derek Vance stood by his office, coffee in hand, looking like he'd been waiting for this moment. His smile was small and sharp, like a knife held just under the surface. Mason's gaze stayed steady. I'm not here to argue. I'm here to work. Derek took a slow sip. You're here to be a problem. I cleaned your detail bay yesterday, Mason said. You didn't pay me. Fine. But I saw something in your service area that isn't safe. Derek laughed softly. Oh, we got ourselves an OSHA inspector now. Someone's going to get hurt, Mason said. I'm telling you because I don't want it on your conscience. Derek's eyes hardened. My conscience is just fine. Mason nodded like he expected that answer. He turned slightly as if to leave, then stopped and looked Derek straight in the face. Hire me, Mason said. Put me in the back. I'll do the jobs nobody wants. I'll make sure nobody gets hurt. Derek stepped forward, voice lowering. I told you I'd have you trespassed. Mason didn't move. Then do it, he said. But I'm not begging. That calm again, like Mason had nothing to lose, made Derek's jaw twitch. "You want a job?" Derek snapped, suddenly louder, drawing the attention of the salesman and a couple walking in behind them. "Fine, I'll give you one." Mason waited. Derek smiled like a man about to entertain himself. "You see that row of bikes?" He pointed toward the showroom display, the Harleys lined up like weapons. "We've got a special delivery coming in. I need the crates moved. Heavy, awkward. You move them from the loading bay to storage. No touching the bikes. No talking to customers. And you do it fast." Mason nodded. "I can do that." Derek's smile widened. "Pay? $20 when you're done." Mason's eyes didn't flicker. "You owe me 60 from yesterday." The air chilled. Derek leaned close enough that Mason could smell his coffee and mint gum. "You keep talking about money," Derek whispered. "Sounds like you're not here for work. Sounds like you're here for a handout." Mason's hands tightened once, then relaxed. "You said 20, he said. "I'll do the work, but I'm not forgetting what you did." Derek's eyes narrowed. "Good, don't forget, because you're going to learn something today." He turned and barked toward the service doors. "Ray, open the bay. Let our guest earn his keep." Ray stepped out, saw Mason, and his expression shifted, something like guilt flickering behind irritation. He said nothing. He just held the door. Mason walked through into the service area. The shop was waking up, air compressors coughing to life, radios turning on, tools clinking against metal. The smell of oil and rubber wrapped around him like a memory. Near the back, a delivery truck was already backed into the loading bay. 2 wooden crates sat on the pallet jack, big enough to hold motorcycles. Mason stepped toward them, and that's when he noticed it again. The red fuel can. Closer now, almost kissing the heater's edge. And something else. A faint, sharp smell cutting through the air. Gasoline. Mason's head turned slowly, scanning the concrete. He saw the slick sheen near the heater, a thin trail leading away like someone had poured just enough to be dangerous, but not enough to be obvious. Ray walked past and muttered, "Don't touch anything that ain't yours." Mason ignored him. He crouched, placed 2 fingers on the wetness, and smelled it once. Gas. Fresh. His pulse didn't spike. It focused. He stood and looked toward the main shop floor. 2 mechanics were welding near Bay 2. Sparks flickered like fireflies. Mason's eyes locked on the fuel can, then on the heater, then on the sparks. A picture formed in his mind in less than a second. Flame racing along the trail. Explosion, shrapnel, screams, smoke. He moved, not fast like panic, fast like training. He grabbed the fuel can and carried it away from the heater, set it behind a metal cabinet, then stomped a shop rag into the spill, pressing it down, smothering the fumes. He waved a hand toward the welder. "Kill it!" Mason barked. The welder looked up, annoyed. "Who the hell?" Mason didn't argue. He yanked the fire extinguisher off the wall and pointed at the spill. "Gas," he said, one word, command. Ray turned, saw the sheen, and his face drained. "Shut it down!" he shouted, suddenly sounding like a man who understood too late. The welder shut off the torch. For half a second, everything paused. Then a customer's voice echoed from the front service counter. Someone complaining, someone impatient, someone loud. Ray jogged toward the office area. Mechanics moved around the spill, muttering. Mason kept pressure on the rag and scanned for ignition sources like his life depended on it. Because it did. From the front, Derek's voice boomed through the open doorway. "What's going on back there? We got customers," Ray yelled back. "Fuel spill." Derek's footsteps approached, irritated, then stopped when he saw Mason kneeling over the soaked rag, extinguisher in hand like he'd been born holding it. Derek's eyes narrowed. "What did you do?" Mason looked up. "I stopped you from burning this place down," he said. Derek's face darkened. "You were messing with my equipment?" "It was next to a heater," Mason said. "There's gas on the floor." Derek's gaze flicked to the welder's station, to the spill, then back to Mason. Something in his eyes flashed. Anger, yes, but also something else. A quick calculation. He recovered fast. "Get up," Derek said. "You're done here." Mason rose slowly, hands open again. "Call your people. Clean it properly. Ventilate. Don't restart the torch until it's safe." Derek's jaw clenched. "I said you're done." Mason took one step back, and at that exact moment, the service bay door to the parking lot swung open as a customer's teenage son ran in, breathless. "Dad! Dad fell!" the kid yelled. "He hit the ground! He's not moving!" Every head turned. For a split second, the shop froze in that useless way crowds freeze. Mason didn't. He dropped the extinguisher, sprinted through the bay door, and cut across the lot toward a man sprawled near the curb beside a pickup truck. The man's skin had a grayish tone already, lips tinged blue, eyes half open like he was looking through the sky. A woman knelt beside him, screaming his name. "Sir," Mason said, dropping to his knees. "Ma'am, move back. Give me space." "I called 911, she cried. "They said—" Mason didn't wait for instructions. He checked the man's airway, pressed fingers to his neck. No pulse he could find. He tilted the head, sealed his hands on the center of the chest, and started compressions, hard, steady, exact. His elbows locked, shoulders over his hands, rhythm perfect. 1, 2, 3, 4, the woman sobbed. The teenage boy stood frozen, shaking. Mason didn't look up. "How long?" he demanded. I don't know. He just, was he complaining of chest pain?" Mason asked, still compressing. "Yes," the woman screamed. "He said his arm hurt." Mason's voice stayed calm. Okay, we're going to keep him here until help arrives." He kept counting, compressing, breathing in time with the work, like the world narrowed to the single job of forcing life back into a body that wanted to quit. Around them, people gathered. Someone started filming. Someone yelled for an AED. From the doorway, Derek ran out, eyes wide, shifting instantly from manager to performer. "Everybody back!" Derek shouted. "Give him room!" Mason didn't acknowledge Derek. He didn't have time. A tech sprinted out with an AED case, hands shaking as he dropped beside Mason. I got it." "Open it," Mason ordered. "Turn it on. Follow the prompts." The machine beeped. A robotic voice began instructions. Mason kept compressions until it said, "Stop." The tech peeled pads, slapped them on the man's chest with trembling fingers. "Clear," Mason barked, raising his hands. The shock delivered with a jolt. The man's body jumped. Mason was already back on compressions without hesitation. 1, 2, 3, 4. Derek hovered at the edge of the scene, eyes darting to the phone's recording, to the crowd, to the dealership sign behind them, like he was already seeing the headline. Mason didn't see any of that. He saw only the man's face, slack and wrong, and the thin line between life and death that sometimes comes down to whether someone knows what to do in the first 30 seconds. "Come on," Mason muttered under his breath. Not a prayer, just stubbornness. "Stay," the AED voice commanded again. "Stop compressions, analyzing." Mason froze, hands hovering. The machine beeped faster. "Shock advised." "Clear," Mason shouted. The shock hit, and for a half second, just a half second, the man's chest jerked in a way that looked different, not the stiff jolt from electricity. A breath, a ragged, ugly breath, like the body was angry to be dragged back. The woman screamed. The boy sobbed. Mason leaned close, checking again. And Derek Vance stepped forward into the frame of every phone, raising his hands like a savior arriving at the final moment, his voice loud enough to own the story. Sir, stay with us. We've got you. Vance Motors has you." Mason looked up sharply, eyes flashing for the first time. Because Derek wasn't helping, he was claiming. And Mason was about to say something about the gas spill, about the refusal to pay, about the way "support our heroes" meant nothing in the cold. When the man on the pavement suddenly convulsed hard, choking, eyes rolling, Mason snapped back down, bracing him, turning his head to the side as foam gathered at the corner of his mouth. "Don't let him swallow," Mason started, reaching, and the man's body went rigid under his hands. Mason felt the man's body lock up like a board beneath his hands. Not the loose collapse of a faint, not the slow drift of someone passing out. This was violent, muscles clamping, jaw tightening, throat fighting air like it had turned into a narrow pipe. "Seizure!" someone shouted, voice cracking. Mason didn't look at the face filming him, didn't look at Derek stepping into the frame like a politician shaking hands at a disaster scene. He caught the man's shoulder and hip and rolled him carefully onto his side, keeping the head tilted so whatever was coming up wouldn't go back down. "Don't hold him down," Mason snapped to the closest hands, reaching in. Back up! Give him room! The wife, still on her knees, soaked in panic, grabbed at Mason's sleeve. Is he dying? Mason's eyes stayed on the man's mouth, on the way his chest stuttered. He's alive, Mason said, calm and absolute. Help is coming. The teenager stared at his father like he was watching a nightmare that refused to end. Dad? Mason pointed without looking up. You, tell me his name. Tom, the boy choked out. Tom Hensley. Tom, Mason said, loud enough for the man's body to hear if any part of him still could. Stay with us? The seizure eased, leaving the man trembling and limp. His breathing came in harsh, wet pulls. Mason checked his pulse again, weak, but there. Relief didn't hit Mason like relief. It hit like responsibility shifting shape. He glanced toward the dealership doors. A crowd had formed. Phones were up. Some people prayed. Some people watched with that eerie fascination like pain was entertainment, as long as it wasn't theirs. And Derek Vance was right there, center stage, waving his arms like a director. Everyone, please, Derek called, voice booming. Our staff is trained for emergencies. We've got it handled. Mason's head snapped up. His gaze cut through Derek like a blade. Our staff, Mason said, voice low. Derek leaned closer, smiling for the cameras. Don't worry, buddy. I'll take it from here. Buddy. Like Mason was a helpful stranger who wandered in at the right time. Like Derek hadn't shoved him out yesterday. Like Derek hadn't stiffed him. Like Derek hadn't threatened him. Mason's hands tightened once on the AED case. He forced them open again. He didn't have time to fight a man's ego while another man fought for his heart. Sirens started in the distance, faint, then closer. A paramedic unit cut into the lot, lights strobing red-blue across the shiny bikes behind the glass. 2 medics jumped out with a gurney, moving fast, focused. What do we got? One demanded. Derek stepped forward instantly, pointing at the man on the ground. He collapsed. Cardiac arrest. My team started CPR. Mason rose so fast it looked like a flinch. No, he said, loud enough to stop the lie mid-sentence. He arrested. I did compressions. AED delivered 2 shocks. He seized after ROSC. He's breathing now, weak pulse. The medic's eyes locked on Mason, scanning him in half a second. Stance, voice, the way he spoke in clean information instead of drama. Who are you? The medic asked. Mason, he said. I'm trained. Derek chuckled, trying to soften it for the cameras. He's a passerby who jumped in. We appreciate it, but the medic ignored Derek completely. Any meds? Any known history? He asked Mason. Mason turned to the wife. Ma'am, does he have heart meds? Blood thinners? Anything? She shook her head hard. He has high blood pressure. Okay, Mason said, translating it into quick words the medics could use. Hypertension. Chest pain radiating to arm before collapse per spouse. The medics moved in, lifted the man carefully onto the gurney, strapped him down, oxygen mask on, monitors beeping. The wife climbed into the ambulance shaking. The teenage boy stumbled after, eyes locked on Mason like he didn't know how to thank someone for giving him his father back. Before the doors shut, the boy leaned out and shouted over the siren, "Thank you!" Mason nodded once, small. Go, he said. Stay with him. The ambulance pulled away. The crowd exhaled like the scene had ended, like it was time for normal life to return. But Mason stayed still, because he could feel Derek's eyes on him. And Mason could feel something else too, the sharp smell of gasoline still clinging to his gloves, like a ghost of what could have happened inside that shop. Derek clapped his hands together. All right, he announced to the crowd. Let's give a round of applause to Vance Motors for stepping up when it counts. Some people actually clapped, not because they believed him, because it was easier. Because the story where the rich manager saves the day is clean and comforting. Mason didn't clap. He turned and started walking back toward the service bay, toward the spill that still needed to be handled properly, toward the heater, toward the welding station. He wasn't going to let someone light a torch over fumes just because the drama outside had stolen everyone's attention. Derek's voice snapped. Where do you think you're going? Mason didn't stop. Back to the hazard, he said. You're not an employee, Derek said, stepping after him. You're trespassing. Mason turned slowly. The crowd's phones turned with him. Derek realized too late that he'd followed Mason into the camera's attention. I'm trying to keep your people alive, Mason said, voice steady. That's where I'm going. Derek's smile tightened. You've done enough. Get off my property. Mason looked at the crowd, at the banner, Support Our Heroes, at the donation box visible through the glass. Vance cares. Then he looked back at Derek. Pay me what you owe me, Mason said, not loud but clear. And stop putting on a show while you endanger people behind that wall. The crowd shifted. Someone murmured, He owes him? Derek's eyes flashed warning. You want to do this here? Mason's voice stayed calm, but the air around him felt like a storm building. You chose here. Derek leaned in, too close, teeth bared in a smile. You're going to ruin my business with your little sob story? It's not a story, Mason said. It's my life. Derek's smile vanished. In front of everyone, he made a decision, the kind that men with power make when they think they can get away with it. He raised his voice, sharp. He stole from us. Silence. Mason blinked once. What? Derek pointed at Mason's jacket like he could see through fabric. Donation box was short yesterday. Now this guy shows up again, causes a scene and suddenly wants money? Come on, put it together. The crowd's mood shifted fast, like it always does when someone gives them permission to hate. A woman whispered, He did look suspicious. A man muttered, Always something with those people. Mason's chest tightened, not from guilt, from disbelief at how easily a lie could land. You're lying, Mason said. Derek shrugged with theatrical sadness. Search him. The security guard was already coming out, hands flexing like he'd been waiting for a legal excuse to get rough. 2 other staff members trailed behind, unsure but obedient. Mason lifted his hands again, palms out. I didn't take anything, he said, louder now. Check the cameras. Derek's eyebrows rose like he'd been offered a joke. Cameras? Oh, you mean the cameras that were down yesterday? Yeah, funny timing. Mason's eyes narrowed. They were down? Derek didn't answer. He nodded toward the guard. Do it. The guard grabbed Mason's arm hard enough to pinch skin. Another hand yanked at Mason's jacket pockets, turning them inside out. A folded receipt, a bus schedule, a lighter, nothing else. See? Mason said. Nothing. Derek clicked his tongue. Check the inside pocket. Mason's breath caught. He hadn't even remembered the inside pocket. The guard shoved a hand inside, fingers scraping cloth, and then pulled something out. A wad of folded bills. The crowd made a sound, half gasp, half confirmation. Mason stared at the money like it had grown out of his jacket. That's not mine, he said instantly. I don't. Derek spread his hands like a saint forced to accept reality. There it is. Mason took a step forward, anger finally rising. You planted that. Derek's eyes went cold. Careful, he whispered, then louder for the crowd. Call the cops. Katie's car pulled into the employee lot at that exact moment. She stepped out, saw the crowd gathered near the entrance, saw Derek standing tall like he was addressing a town meeting, saw Mason with his pockets turned out, and she started running. Mason! She shouted, pushing through the crowd. Derek's head snapped toward her. His expression flashed panic for half a second, then turned into fury. Katie reached Mason, breathless. What's happening? He says I stole, Mason said, voice tight. That money isn't mine. Katie's eyes locked on the bills in the guard's hand. She knew those bills, because she had watched Tina stack crisp folded donations the night before, and because she had watched Derek pocket a number like it was a prop. Katie looked up at Derek. That's from the donation box, she said, voice shaking. Derek's smile stayed, but his eyes threatened her. Katie, he said softly, don't. She swallowed. Her hand went to her blazer pocket where the coin was, like touching it could give her spine. Check the cameras, Mason said again. Derek's jaw tightened. We will, when the police get here. Sirens started again in the distance, different sirens this time, not paramedics, police. The crowd parted as a cruiser rolled up, lights flashing. Another pulled behind it. An officer stepped out, hand resting near his belt, eyes already trained on Mason like the decision was made before words were spoken. Derek walked forward to meet them, speaking fast, confident, rehearsed. Officer, thank God you're here. This man has been harassing my staff for days. Today he stole from our veterans' donation box. We found the money on him. The officer's gaze flicked to Mason, then to the bills, then back to Mason. "Is that true?" he asked. Mason's throat felt like sand. "No," he said. "It was planted. I saved a man's life here 10 minutes ago, and now he's framing me." The officer's face didn't change. "Turn around," he said. Mason didn't move. "Check the cameras," he repeated, voice harder now. Derek smiled. "Cameras were down yesterday, and today we've got witnesses." The officer stepped closer. "Turn around, hands behind your back." Katie's voice broke. "He didn't do it." Derek's head turned, eyes like knives. "Katie, go inside." She didn't. Mason looked at the officer, then at the crowd, then at the banner above the door. "Support our heroes." He inhaled once, slow, and did the last thing pride allowed him. He complied. He turned. The officer grabbed his wrists, pulled them back, cuffs clicking tight, metal bit skin. Mason's jaw clenched as the cold steel locked, and as the officer pushed him toward the cruiser, Mason caught Katie's eye. "Don't let him," Mason said quietly. Katie's eyes filled. "I won't," she whispered, but it sounded like a promise she didn't yet know how to keep. The cruiser door opened. Mason stepped forward, and Derek Vance leaned in close behind him, voice low enough that only Mason could hear. "You think anyone's coming for you?" Derek whispered. "You're already forgotten." Then the door slammed, and Katie stood in the parking lot holding a coin with Mason's name on it, watching him disappear behind tinted glass while the Freedom Ride banner fluttered above the entrance like a lie that never moved. The back seat of the cruiser smelled like old sweat and disinfectant. Mason sat with his hands cuffed in front of him, wrists burning where the metal cut into skin. The plastic bench was slick, designed to make you feel like you didn't belong anywhere, not even in discomfort. The officer up front didn't look back, didn't ask questions, didn't bother with the kind of small talk that sometimes reminds a person they're still human. Outside the window, Vance Motors shrank behind them. The Freedom Ride banner was still visible for a second, fluttering above the glass doors like a flag over a conquered place. "You're already forgotten." Derek's whisper stayed in Mason's ear even after the door slammed. Mason stared straight ahead and breathed slow. Not because he was calm, but because panic is a luxury. Panic makes you sloppy. Sloppy gets you buried. At the station, they led him through a side door like he was contagious. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A desk sergeant glanced up, saw Mason's jacket and boots, and his expression tightened with a familiar kind of judgment. "Name?" the sergeant asked. "Mason Reed," the sergeant typed. "Address?" Mason paused a fraction too long. "No fixed address." The sergeant didn't hide the look that followed. "Of course." They took his shoelaces, his belt, whatever little possessions he had in his pockets. The officer who'd cuffed him dropped the wad of cash on the counter like it was a trophy. "Found on him," the officer said. "Donation box money." Mason's voice was controlled. "That was planted." The officer shrugged. "Sure." They put him in a holding room first, cold, cement, a bench bolted to the wall. A man in a dirty hoodie snored in the corner. Another guy muttered to himself, rocking. Mason sat and listened to the building. Distant phones ringing, doors buzzing open, boots on tile. Time crawled in a way that felt deliberate. Eventually, they called his name and moved him into a small interview room, a metal table, 2 chairs, a camera in the corner that made you sit straighter even if you didn't care anymore. A different officer walked in, older, slower, eyes that actually looked at people before making decisions. His name tag read, S. Caldwell. Caldwell set a folder on the table and sat down without rushing. "Mason Reed," he said. "That's you." "Yes." "You served," Caldwell added, not a question. Mason didn't answer right away. "Yes." Caldwell flipped the folder open. "Army?" "Yes." Caldwell held Mason's gaze for a moment, like he was checking for lies with something other than suspicion. Then he said, "You got paperwork?" "Not on me," Mason replied. "It was stolen months ago. I can tell you my unit and discharge." Caldwell nodded like he believed him, but still needed it clean. "Say it." Mason gave him the information. Unit, years. A few details that weren't performative, just factual. Caldwell wrote it down, then stood and walked to the door. Before leaving, he paused. "You know CPR," he said. "I know how to keep someone alive," Mason replied. Caldwell left the room. Minutes later, the door opened again. But it wasn't Caldwell. It was a younger officer with a hard face and a louder attitude, the kind Derek Vance would like. He sat down fast, tossed a pen on the table like it was a weapon. "So here's how this goes," the younger officer said. "You stole money. We've got witness statements. Manager says you've been harassing them. If you sign a confession, you get a slap on the wrist, maybe time served, and you're out." Mason stared at him. "I'm not signing a lie." The officer leaned in. "You're homeless. You don't have an attorney, you don't have a job, you don't have an address. You're not exactly looking like a jury's favorite person." Mason's jaw tightened. "Check the cameras." The officer scoffed. Cameras were down according to the manager. Mason's eyes narrowed. "Convenient." The officer's grin turned cruel. "Hey, I get it. Life's hard. But this is an easy out. Sign it. Take the deal. Go back to whatever you were doing." Mason's voice dropped. "I was looking for work." "Sure," the officer said, like he was humoring a child. "Look, we can also charge you with trespassing, disorderly, maybe resisting if you get mouthy. Your choice." Mason didn't blink. "Bring me Caldwell." The officer's smile faded. "You don't get to pick." Mason leaned back, shoulders still straight despite the cuffs marks. "Then do what you're going to do." Silence stretched. The officer stood abruptly and left, slamming the door behind him like he wanted Mason to flinch. Mason didn't. He stared at the metal tabletop, mind running through the sequence at Vance Motors, guard's hands in his jacket, Derek's confident timing, the way the officer's eyes had already decided before Mason spoke. It wasn't just a frame job, it was a machine, and Derek had money to oil it. In the hallway, Caldwell's voice rose, quiet but sharp. "I want the camera footage." A different voice, defensive. "Manager says it was down." Caldwell. "Then I want the maintenance logs and the dispatch notes from the medical call. We had a cardiac arrest there today. If this guy saved a life in that lot, I want it documented." The station went quieter, like people didn't enjoy hearing a fact that complicated a clean story. Caldwell came back into the room carrying a printout. He sat down and placed it on the table. "You are who you said you are," Caldwell said. Mason's throat tightened, not with relief, with something like exhaustion finally being acknowledged. Caldwell continued. "Honorably discharged, multiple commendations, no active warrants." The room felt smaller. "So why am I still here?" Mason asked. Caldwell's expression hardened slightly, not at Mason, but at the situation. "Because the complainant is Derek Vance." Mason didn't answer. He didn't need to. He could hear the name like a door shutting. Caldwell tapped the folder. "You say the money was planted?" "It was," Mason said. Caldwell nodded. "Any proof?" "Cameras," Mason replied immediately. "You know it." Caldwell exhaled. "Here's the problem. Vance Motors says their showroom cameras were down yesterday. Today's footage is unavailable because their system rebooted during the emergency." Mason's eyes went cold. "He's covering his tracks." Caldwell looked at him for a long moment, then said, "Maybe." Mason leaned forward slightly. "There was also a fuel spill in the service bay today. Gasoline, by a heater, near welding. Someone could have died." Caldwell's eyebrows lifted. "You report that?" "I tried," Mason said. "Derek threatened me." Caldwell's jaw tightened as he wrote, "Okay, a beat." Caldwell closed the folder. "I can't prove he planted it, not yet, but I can choose what to do with you right now." Mason's hands flexed against the cuffs. "And," Caldwell spoke carefully, "if you fight this, they'll drag it. Trespass charges, theft accusations. You'll be stuck. If you walk out, you'll still be the guy who stole from the veterans box in that town by tomorrow morning." Mason's eyes held steady. "I'm already that guy," he said quietly, because he said it. Caldwell stared, like the truth of that hit him in the chest. Then he pushed a form across the table. "I'm releasing you pending further investigation," Caldwell said. "No admission, no confession." Mason didn't move. "Why?" Caldwell's voice lowered. "Because you don't talk like a thief. And because the paramedic report says a man would be dead if you weren't there." Mason stared at the form. The urge to thank Caldwell rose, but he swallowed it. Gratitude could wait. Survival couldn't. Caldwell stood. "You'll be served a summons if they pursue it. If they do, get a public defender, and—" He paused, eyes flicking to Mason's torn jacket. "Stay away from Vance Motors." Mason looked up. "Someone's going to get hurt there," he said again. Caldwell's expression tightened. "Then report it through proper channels." Mason gave a humorless breath. "Proper channels don't work when the wrong people own them." Caldwell didn't deny it. He just opened the door. "I'm giving you a chance," he said. "Don't waste it." They uncuffed Mason in the hallway. The metal released with a click that felt too light for what it had taken out of him. Outside the station, the sky was the dull gray of a day that didn't care. Mason stepped onto the sidewalk, rubbing his wrists. Cold wind cut through him again. He had no money, no job. And now he had a fresh label stapled to his name in that town. Across the street, a small group of people stood near a coffee shop window, watching him. One of them whispered. Another shook their head. Mason didn't look back. He walked. Behind him, Caldwell stood at the station doorway for a moment, watching Mason go like he wanted to do more but didn't know how without burning his own career. Meanwhile, 2 miles away, Katie sat in her car in a grocery store parking lot with her phone in her hand, reading Eli's messages again and again. "Where is he now?" she typed. "He was arrested. They took him to the station. I don't know if he's still there." Eli's reply came in seconds. "Stay on your phone. Do not go near your boss. Tell Frank I'm calling him. And Katie, thank you. You may have just found the wrong guy to mess with." Katie's breath caught. She looked at the dealership in the distance, lights bright, banners visible even from here, like the building was daring her to challenge it. Inside Derek's office, Derek Vance poured himself another coffee and stared at his donation spreadsheet. Tina stood near the desk, arms crossed. "Did he confess?" Tina asked. "Doesn't matter," Derek said. "The damage is done. Everyone saw the money, everyone heard the accusation. That's enough." Tina smirked. "And Saturday?" Derek smiled, calm again. "Saturday is ours." He tapped the Freedom Ride schedule with one finger like it was a prophecy. "On Saturday," Derek said, "we're going to look like heroes." Outside, Mason walked toward the edge of town, shoulders squared against the wind, carrying nothing but the same stubborn refusal to disappear. He didn't know a message was bouncing between phones. He didn't know a network was waking up. He only knew the cold had teeth, and he had to keep moving. And somewhere, in a garage across state lines, Eli started calling names, one after another. Names that didn't belong to ordinary men. Names that answered. Eli's garage wasn't fancy. Concrete floor stained dark from years of oil. A wall of tools arranged like weapons. A battered workbench with a coffee can full of bolts and a radio that only played when it felt like it. But the space had one thing Vance Motors never would. Truth. In the center, under a hanging work light, sat Eli's Harley with the side panel off, wires exposed like veins. He wasn't working on it anymore. His hands were still. His phone was hot against his palm. He stared at Katie's last message. He was arrested. They took him to the station. And then he scrolled back up to the photo of the coin. Mason Reed. Eli exhaled slowly, like the air in the room had turned heavy. He walked to a shelf in the corner and pulled down a small metal box. Inside were things he kept when he couldn't sleep, old unit photos, a torn map with circles drawn in marker, a folded flag from a funeral he still didn't talk about, and a coin. Not the same one, a different coin, same crest. Eli held it side by side with the picture on his phone. The scratches lined up in his memory like a song you don't forget. That coin meant one thing. The men who carried it had been in the same hell. Eli's thumb hovered over the call list. He didn't start with the loud guys. He started with the quiet ones, the ones who didn't post photos of themselves online, the ones who didn't brag, the ones who showed up when it mattered and disappeared when it was done. First call. "Rook," Eli said when the line picked up, a voice, rough and half asleep. "It's 3 a.m. "Yeah, I wouldn't call if it wasn't Mason." Silence. Then, softer. "Mason Reed." Eli swallowed. "He's alive. He's in trouble. He's homeless. A dealership manager framed him for stealing from a veteran's donation box." The line stayed quiet long enough for Eli to hear breathing. "What's the address?" Rook asked. Eli gave it. Second call. "Jessa," Eli said, a woman's voice sharp and awake instantly. "If you're calling, it's bad." "It's Mason," Eli said again, and watched his own hands start to shake. Jessa didn't ask who. She didn't ask why. She just said, I'm in. Third call, then fourth, then fifth. Names that sounded like nicknames because real names belonged to lives that ended back there. Patch, Doc, Hammer, Cal, Finch, Sarge, Tank. Each call was the same at first. Disbelief, then a quiet shift into motion. Where is he? What happened? Who's the manager? Do you have proof? Eli told them what he had. The coin, the photo, the dealership name, Katie's message, and the part that made his voice go tight. He asked for work, not money. They laughed at him. That was the line that did it, not the theft accusation, not even the arrest, the humiliation, because every one of them knew what it cost to ask for help when you'd been trained to never need it. Eli ended the last call and stood there with his phone pressed to his ear like it was an extension of his skull. He looked around the garage and realized his bike didn't matter today. None of it did. He walked out, stepped into the cold night, and started his Harley. The engine barked to life, loud in the quiet neighborhood, shaking windows, waking dogs. Eli didn't care. The sound wasn't just noise, it was a signal. Within minutes, his phone started buzzing with replies, screenshots, names, plans, locations. A group text appeared with a title that made Eli's chest tighten. Read. One message popped up from a number Eli didn't recognize. Frank's grandson. I'm with you, I'll bring the old man too. Then another. I'm 2 hours out. Tell me where. A third. I'm calling the clubs, all of them. Eli stared at the growing wall of messages and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not anger, purpose. Katie didn't sleep. She lay in bed with her phone on her chest, staring at the ceiling while her mind replayed Derek's smirk, the planted bills, the way the officer's hand had grabbed Mason like it was routine. At dawn, she drove to work early. So early the streetlights were still on and the sky was just starting to lighten at the edges. The dealership was quiet, doors locked, showroom dark except for emergency lights. She sat in her car for a full minute before getting out, breathing like she was about to walk into a storm. Her phone buzzed. Eli. He's out? Katie's fingers flew. I don't know. They took him last night. I haven't heard. Another buzz. Eli. Find out, if you can. And listen, your boss is going to notice something. He'll get paranoid. Don't get caught. Katie stared at the message, then looked at the building. The Freedom Ride banner was still there, visible through the glass. Support our heroes. Katie's throat tightened. She stepped out, unlocked the employee door, and went inside. She didn't even take her coat off. She went straight to the counter and checked the schedule. Then she checked the computer system for customer notes. Her hands shook as she clicked. Cameras, security system. She wasn't IT, she wasn't a hacker, but she knew one thing. Derek loved control. He would have someone on call for anything that threatened his image. She found the service vendor number in the contacts list, security system support, and wrote it down. Then she printed yesterday's appointment list and noticed a line item that wasn't a customer name. It was a note in the margin, typed like an internal reminder, Reboot 3:12 p.m., DVR. Her heart slammed against her ribs. 3:12 p.m. That was right after the cardiac emergency, right after the fuel spill. Right after Derek realized Mason was in the middle of every phone camera in the lot. Katie slipped the paper into her bag. Footsteps clicked behind her. She turned too fast. Derek Vance stood in the entrance to his office, coffee in hand, expression calm and sharp. You're early, he said. Katie forced a smile. Big weekend. Derek's eyes narrowed just slightly. Yeah, he said, big weekend. He stepped closer to the counter, eyes scanning for anything out of place, like he could smell guilt the way he smelled weakness. You hear anything about our friend? Derek asked casually. Katie kept her face blank. No, Derek leaned in a fraction. Because I'd hate for you to get mixed up with the wrong people. Katie's pulse hammered. She nodded once. I won't. Derek's smile returned, thin. Good. He walked away. Katie waited until he was out of earshot, then pulled the coin out for 1 second and looked at Mason's name again. Mason Reed. She whispered, barely audible, Hold on. Mason didn't go back to the shelter line. He didn't go back to the laundromat steps. He walked the outskirts of town where businesses didn't care who stood near their dumpsters as long as they didn't cause trouble. He kept moving because standing still invited attention, and attention had already cost him cuffs. His wrists still hurt. His body felt older than it was. His stomach was empty again. By late morning, he ended up behind a closed tire shop, crouched beside a stack of pallets, chewing on the last dry crackers he'd found in a donation bin. A shadow fell across him. Mason froze, not fear, readiness. He looked up. A man stood there in a hoodie with his hands visible, palms open the way Mason always did. "Don't," Mason said quietly. "I'm not in the mood." The man swallowed. "I'm not here for trouble." Mason's eyes narrowed. "Then why are you here?" The man reached into his pocket slowly and pulled out a coin. Not Mason's coin, another one. Same crest. Mason's breath caught. His body went still in a way no civilian ever understands. Like a switch had been flipped. The man's voice cracked. "Eli's looking for you." Mason stared at the coin, then at the man, like the world had shifted and he didn't trust it. "Eli," Mason repeated, the name coming out like a ghost. The man nodded. He heard what happened. Mason swallowed hard, throat tight. "No," he said, almost to himself. "He can't." "He can," the man interrupted softly. And he did. Mason's gaze dropped to his own hands, cracked knuckles, cuff marks, dirt under nails, and for the first time in a long time, his voice wasn't steady. "Tell him," Mason said, barely louder than the wind, "to stay out of it." The man shook his head slowly. Too late. And as Mason stood up, stiff and wary, he heard it, far away, not close enough to see, but close enough for the sound to reach him like thunder rolling over a ridge. One engine, then another, then more. A distant rising growl that didn't belong to traffic. Mason's eyes lifted toward the road, and something old and buried inside him started to wake up. The sound didn't belong in this town. It wasn't the thin buzz of commuter cars or the occasional pickup with a loud exhaust. This was deeper, layered, rhythmic, like a storm made of metal. The growl rolled in waves, faded, then surged again as if something big was circling before committing. Mason stood behind the tire shop's pallets, still holding himself like a man who expected a hit. "Where?" he asked the stranger. The man, mid-30s, beard, eyes that had seen the same kind of nights, jerked his chin toward the main road. "They're staging, not coming straight in. Eli's smart." Mason's jaw tightened. "He shouldn't be here." The man gave a short, humorless laugh. "Yeah, he said you'd say that." Mason rubbed his wrist unconsciously, feeling the tender groove the cuffs had left. "I don't need a rescue." "Then don't call it that," the man replied. "Call it accountability." Mason looked past him toward the street, trying to see through buildings and winter haze. "What did you tell him?" "Everything," the man said. "And Katie told him more than we expected." Katie. The name hit Mason like an unexpected warmth in a cold place. He pictured her face behind the desk, nervous, angry at herself, trying to do the right thing without being crushed by the machine Derek ran. Mason exhaled. "She's going to get hurt." The man shook his head. "Not if we do this right." "We," Mason repeated, as if the word didn't fit him anymore. The man stepped back half a pace and raised his phone. On the screen was a group chat, dozens of names, locations, times, short messages that weren't hype, just logistics. Mason's throat tightened when he saw one of the pinned messages at the top. "No violence, no threats. We witness, we document, we protect." Mason looked up slowly. "Eli wrote that." The man nodded. "He's not coming for a fight. He's coming to put the truth where Derek can't bury it." Mason stared at the road again. The engines swelled, then dipped, like a herd moving into place. "Where is he?" Mason asked. "Eli?" The man's mouth twitched. 5 minutes out. "But he's not alone." Mason's face hardened. "How many?" The man hesitated just long enough for the answer to feel heavy. "Enough." Mason closed his eyes for a second. He wasn't praying. He was calculating fallout. Police. Escalation. Cameras. Derek's influence. Katie's safety. The town's appetite for a clean villain. When he opened his eyes, he saw movement at the far end of the alley. 2 people walking toward them fast. One was a woman in a black riding jacket, hair tucked under a beanie, face sharp with purpose. The other was an older man in a worn ball cap. Frank. the Vietnam veteran from the showroom. Frank's breath came out in clouds as he approached. He stopped a few feet from Mason and looked him up and down like he was trying to reconcile the proud soldier in his memory with the exhausted man in front of him. "I should have said something," Frank said, voice gravelly. "In that showroom." Mason's expression tightened. "You don't owe me anything." Frank shook his head. "That's where you're wrong, son. We all owe each other something. I just forgot for a minute." The woman stepped forward, eyes scanning Mason like she was checking for injuries. "I'm Jessa," she said. "Eli sent me ahead. You hurt?" Mason's instinct was to lie. "I'm fine." Jessa's gaze dropped to his wrists, the faint metal marks, the swelling. She didn't comment. She just nodded once like she'd filed it away. "We can get you out of town," Frank offered. "Quiet, no fuss." Mason looked at him. "Running doesn't fix what Derek did." Jessa's lips pressed together. "And fighting him won't either." Mason's eyes narrowed. "Then what is this?" Jessa lifted her chin toward the road. "This is leverage. Derek built a life on public image. You don't break that with fists. You break it with witnesses and paperwork and 100 cameras pointed at the right things." Mason let that sit. Another wave of engines rolled closer now, a low, steady thunder that vibrated in Mason's ribs. Frank flinched, then smiled faintly, like he'd just heard an old hymn. "They're really coming," Frank murmured. Mason didn't smile, not yet. He looked at Jessa. "Katie, what did she say?" Jessa's expression sharpened. She found a note. "Reboot 3:12 p.m. DVR. That's the security system. That's the moment Derek made sure your side of the story disappeared." Mason's jaw clenched. "She has proof?" "She has a breadcrumb," Jessa said, "and we're going to turn it into a trail." Frank glanced around, uneasy. "What about police?" Jessa nodded once. "Already accounted for. We've got people calling from outside jurisdictions. We've got a lawyer on standby. We've got riders who'll record everything, and we've got someone who knows how to request footage legally from the security vendor." Mason stared. "Security vendor?" Jessa smiled without warmth. "Derek doesn't own his own cameras. He leases the system. He can reboot the DVR. He can delete local clips, but vendors keep logs, sometimes backups, sometimes cloud snapshots, depends on the contract." Mason's eyes stayed hard. "And if there's nothing?" "Then we still have today," Jessa said. "We still have him stiffing you. We still have him accusing you in front of witnesses. We still have the fact you saved a man's life and he tried to steal credit. We still have Frank. We still have Katie." Mason looked away toward the street. "He'll come after her." Jessa stepped closer, voice dropping. "That's why we're moving before Derek can. We're putting protection around her without making her the story." Frank nodded. "My grandson's already got buddies watching her route home." Mason's shoulders tightened. "I didn't ask for that." Frank's gaze held his. "You didn't ask to be treated like trash either." The engines rose again, very close now. Not in the alley, but on the main road, rolling past in a long, controlled line. Mason could hear the distinct staggered rhythm of V-twins, one after another, like a heartbeat multiplied. Jessa lifted her phone and showed Mason a live location pin on a map. "See that?" she said. "That's the lead group. They're not going to the dealership yet. They're going to the county admin building first." Mason frowned. "Why?" "Because Derek's event is Saturday," Jessa said. "He's expecting cameras he can charm. We're bringing cameras he can't control. But first we do this clean. Permits, public assembly. And we notify law enforcement ourselves. That way, Derek can't spin it as a mob." Mason's eyes narrowed. "Eli is thinking like an operator." Jessa's mouth twitched. "Eli learned from you." The words landed heavier than the engines. Mason stared at the map. County admin building, legal footing, documentation. "Where am I going?" Mason asked. Frank pointed to a dark sedan parked near the alley exit. "With me, we get you warm, we get you food, we get you cleaned up, then we put you where Derek can't ignore you." Mason's pride surged, reflexive, stubborn. He started to shake his head. Jessa cut him off. "Don't do that thing," she said bluntly. "What thing?" "The thing where you think taking help makes you weak," she said. "You already paid for your pride. Let us pay for your safety." Mason's jaw worked. He looked down at his hands, the cracks, the dirt, the cuff marks. Then he looked at Frank and saw a man older than him who still carried regret like a backpack. Mason nodded once. "Fine," he said, voice quiet. One day. I'll take one day. Frank exhaled like he'd been holding his breath. They moved toward the sedan. As Mason slid into the back seat, warmth hit his face from the heater vents and he almost flinched from it. Frank started the car. Jessa stood outside for a second, phone pressed to her ear. Eli, she said, we have him. She listened, then her eyes flicked to Mason through the window. Yeah, she added, he's still trying to refuse help, so he's exactly the same. She hung up and leaned down to the window. Eli said, tell you something. Mason looked up. Jessa's voice softened just a fraction. He said, tell Mason he doesn't get to disappear on us again. Mason swallowed hard and looked away as the car pulled out of the alley. They drove toward a small motel on the edge of town, one of those places that didn't ask questions as long as you paid cash. Frank paid. Jessa kept watch. Mason took a hot shower that stung like punishment and felt like mercy at the same time. When he stepped out, wrapped in a thin towel, Frank tossed him a set of clean clothes, jeans, a flannel, a plain black t-shirt. Eli's, Frank said. Close enough. Mason dressed slowly, staring at his own reflection in the mirror. Cleaner now, still gaunt, still tired. But his eyes looked different, less like a man waiting to be erased. Jessa knocked once, then entered with a paper bag. Eat, she said, setting it down. Then we move. Mason opened the bag. Burger, fries, a bottle of water. He didn't devour it. He ate like a man who'd learned to ration. But when he finished, something steadied in him. Jessa's phone buzzed again. She glanced at the screen and her expression tightened. What? Mason asked. Jessa looked up. Derek's already spinning it, she said. He posted. Mason frowned. Posted what? Jessa turned the phone toward him, a video from the dealership's social page. Derek in front of the Freedom Ride banner, smiling wide, voice warm and righteous. And yesterday we had a disturbing incident, Derek was saying. A man pretending to be a veteran attempted to steal from our donation box. We handled it safely and turned the matter over to police. We want our community to know. We will not tolerate scams that exploit our heroes. Mason stared at his own life being rewritten in real time. Frank's hands clenched into fists. Jessa's voice went cold. He just called you a fake on camera. Mason's face went very still. Saturday, he said quietly. Jessa nodded. No, not just Saturday. She tapped her screen again. Another message, another update. Eli's accelerating, she said. They're not waiting. Mason looked at her. What do you mean? Jessa met his eyes. I mean, she said, the first bikes are turning toward Vance Motors right now. The motel room felt too small for the sound coming through Jessa's phone. Not the audio from Derek's video, that smug, polished voice calling Mason a fake, but the new sound layered under it from outside. Engines. A steady growl moving somewhere nearby, not close enough to see through the thin curtains, but close enough to vibrate in the cheap glass. Mason stood by the window without touching it, eyes fixed on nothing. Tell them to stop, he said, voice low. Jessa didn't argue. She just raised the phone and called Eli. He answered on the second ring. Wind noise, engine noise, voices in the background. We have him, Jessa said. He says stop. A beat. Eli's voice came through, calm but iron. Put him on. Jessa handed the phone to Mason. Mason brought it to his ear. For a second, he couldn't speak. His throat tightened in a way it hadn't since overseas, when you heard a voice you didn't expect to hear again. Eli, he said finally. Boss, Eli replied, using the old word without joking. You alive? Mason stared at the motel wall. Yeah. You okay? No, Mason said. But I'm alive. Eli exhaled, and Mason could picture it, the way Eli always did that before he took on something bigger than himself. They're coming, Mason said. Don't do this. We're not doing what you think we're doing, Eli answered. Mason's jaw flexed. You have people turning toward a dealership. That's exactly what I think you're doing. Eli's voice stayed level. No violence, no threats. We notified law enforcement. We're recording. We're walking in daylight. We're standing where he can't hide. Mason closed his eyes. He'll spin it. He already spun it, Eli said. He called you a fake on camera. Mason felt that line hit his chest again. It was one thing to be mocked in a showroom. It was another to have your name turned into a warning label for the whole town. He wants me invisible, Mason said. That's why we're loud, Eli replied. Mason's hand tightened around the phone. Katie. Eli didn't hesitate. We've got eyes on her. She's not alone. Mason's voice sharpened. Do you understand what you're pulling her into? Eli's tone didn't change, but it carried weight. She stepped in on her own. She's the only one in that building who didn't look away. Mason swallowed. I don't want anyone hurt. Neither do we, Eli said. That's why we're doing this clean. Mason looked at Jessa, who watched him like she could read every thought he didn't speak. Frank stood by the door with his arms crossed, face set like stone. Mason lowered his voice. How many? Eli paused, then answered honestly. Right now, a couple dozen close, more en route, and it's growing. Mason's stomach dipped. Eli, listen, Eli cut in, and for the first time his voice cracked a little. You saved me. You saved a lot of us. And then you vanished. You don't get to decide you're alone again. Mason's eyes burned. He forced the feeling down. This isn't about me, Mason said. It is now, Eli replied, because he made it about you. Mason breathed in slow. If you do this wrong, he'll turn you into a threat and himself into a victim. Eli's answer came instantly. That's why we aren't showing up with fists. We're showing up with receipts. Receipts, Mason repeated. We have a lawyer, Eli said. We have a request going to the security vendor. We have the reboot note. We have the paramedic run report. And we have the town watching because you saved a man's life in that lot. Derek can't delete that. Mason stared at his wrists, the faint bruising like a reminder of what Derek could do with a single lie. Where do you need me? Mason asked finally. Eli's voice softened. At the truth, where he can't talk over it. Mason closed his eyes for a beat, then opened them. No weapons, he said. No intimidation, no touching anyone. Eli's voice went steel again. Already said, Mason nodded once, even though Eli couldn't see it. Then I'm coming. You sure? Eli asked quietly. Mason's gaze lifted to the motel mirror. He didn't look like the man in Derek's video. He looked like a man who'd been pushed past the edge and refused to fall. I'm done being quiet, Mason said. Eli exhaled. Good. We'll meet you 2 blocks away from Vance Motors. There's a diner off Route 9. We'll stage there. Jessa knows. Mason handed the phone back to Jessa. She listened for a few seconds, then ended the call. Frank nodded once. Time, he said. They moved fast. Jessa drove. Frank rode shotgun, scanning every car behind them like he expected Derek to have someone watching. Mason sat in the back, hands clasped, staring out the window at a town that looked normal in the morning light, a town that would swear it was decent even after watching a veteran get framed in a parking lot. At the diner, the lot was already filling, not with chaos, with order. Bikes lined up in clean rows, angled the same way. Riders stood in small groups, not laughing, not performing, just waiting. Some wore patches, some wore plain jackets, some wore nothing identifying at all. But they all carried the same quiet posture, disciplined restraint, like people who'd learned what happens when you lose control. Mason stepped out of the car, and the nearest conversations died. Heads turned, eyes locked onto him. Then a man walked forward from the center of the lot. Eli. He looked older than Mason remembered, and younger at the same time, face weathered by miles, eyes clear. He stopped a few feet away, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to close the distance. Mason's throat tightened. He nodded once. Eli stepped in and hugged him anyway, hard, fast, no words, like he was checking with his own arms that Mason was real. When Eli pulled back, his eyes were wet. He blinked it away immediately like he'd learned from Mason not to indulge. Boss, he said again, quieter. Mason looked at him. You shouldn't have come. Eli gave a short laugh, bitter. Yeah, we all heard you say that 100 times. Mason glanced around at the riders. This is too many. Eli followed his gaze. This is only the first wave. Mason's chest tightened. A woman stepped up beside Eli, short hair, calm eyes. Doc? She introduced herself to Mason, then held out a folded paper. Legal briefing. No one breaks formation. No one engages. We record everything. Mason took the paper, eyes scanning bullet points. It was serious. Not cosplay, not posturing. No threats, no blocking traffic, no trespass, no contact. Mason looked up. Good. Another rider stepped forward, Tall, gray beard, biker jacket worn thin. He held a small camera already rolling. "We're live," he said. "Every minute from here is recorded, for your protection and ours." Mason nodded. Eli lifted his chin toward the road. "They're about to start," he said. Mason followed his gaze. In the distance, the dealership's lot was visible beyond a low strip of businesses, and in front of it, in the employee entrance area, he saw a movement, small, sharp, a figure in a fitted blazer. Katie. She stood near the side door like she'd stepped outside for air, but her posture was wrong, too rigid, too alert. Derek stood with her, close enough to be controlling without touching. He said something. Katie's head turned slightly, like she was trying to listen without reacting. Then Derek's hand moved. Not a punch. Something worse. He reached toward her bag, tugged it off her shoulder, and yanked it open like he owned it. Papers fluttered in the breeze. Mason's body went cold. Jess's voice cut in beside him, controlled but urgent. "He's searching her." Mason took a step forward instinctively. Eli's hand caught his sleeve. "Boss, breathe." Mason's eyes never left the scene. "If he finds the reboot note," Jessa nodded, "he'll crush her." A rider somewhere behind them murmured, "We move?" Eli didn't answer them. He looked at Mason. Mason's jaw worked. His voice came out low and lethal with restraint. "We walk. Now. No running, no shouting." Eli turned and raised his hand, a signal. Engines shut off in sequence, one after another, until the diner lot fell into a heavy silence. Then, boots hit asphalt. They began moving in formation toward Vance Motors like a tide that didn't need to rush because it knew it couldn't be stopped. And across the road, Derek Vance lifted his head and saw them coming. Derek Vance didn't react the way most people did when they saw something they couldn't control. He didn't step back. He stepped forward. He stood at the employee entrance with Katie's bag in his hand, papers fluttering against his expensive shoes, and he stared across the road at the line of riders advancing in silence like a verdict. For half a heartbeat, his face betrayed him, panic, sharp and naked. Then he recovered, because that's what men like Derek were built to do. He smiled, a bright practice smile, aimed at the nearest phone, aimed at the sky, aimed at the story he was already writing in his head. "Look at this," he said loudly, voice carrying. "This is exactly what I was talking about, organized intimidation." Katie's throat tightened. She glanced toward the riders, then toward the ground, as if she wanted to disappear into the asphalt. Derek kept one hand on her bag like a leash, flipping through papers with the other. "Derek," she said, voice shaking, "give it back." Derek didn't look at her. "Oh, I will," he said, "after I make sure you didn't steal company property." "I didn't." Derek finally turned his head, eyes cold now. "Then you won't mind, will you?" He pulled out the printed sheet, Reboot 3:12 p.m., DVR, and held it up between two fingers like it was disgusting. Katie's breath caught. Mason saw it from across the road and felt his whole body go still. Jess's voice was low beside him. He found it. Eli's jaw clenched. "Boss?" Mason didn't run. He didn't shout. He walked. The riders moved with him, boots steady, spacing clean. Cameras were up, not hidden, GoPros on helmets, phones in gloved hands, small body cams clipped to jackets. It wasn't a mob. It was a documentation team disguised as thunder. Cars slowed on the road. Drivers craned their necks. A delivery truck honked once, then went quiet. People stepped out of storefronts. Someone near the diner lifted a hand to their mouth, eyes wide, like they were watching history roll in. As the group reached the dealership lot entrance, Derek's smile stiffened. He lifted his voice again, turning to face them like a man greeting a parade. "Gentlemen, ladies, welcome to Vance Motors," he boomed. "We support the community here." Eli didn't answer. No one answered. The silence was worse than heckling. It made Derek's words hang in the air like a cheap smell. Mason stepped out of the formation, just far enough to be seen without breaking the rules. He stopped at the edge of the lot, not crossing any line, hands visible. Derek's eyes locked on him. There was a flicker, recognition, hatred, and something else. Fear that his little story had turned into a bigger one he couldn't edit. "Well, well," Derek said, voice loud for the cameras. "The scam artist himself." Mason's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed even. "Give her bag back." Derek laughed. Who? The employee who's apparently working with criminals? Katie's face went white. I'm not. Quiet, Derek snapped, too fast to hide the control in it. Then he turned back to Mason, smile reattached. You want to talk? Let's talk. You still got my donation money? Mason didn't move. You planted it. A ripple went through the crowd of onlookers. Some people leaned closer. Some stepped back. Derek pointed dramatically at the riders. And this is your backup? This is your intimidation tactic? You think you can show up with a bunch of bikers and scare me? Eli took one step forward, stopping beside Mason, still outside the boundary line. Everything you say, everything you do. Everything you say, everything you do. Derek's eyes flicked to the cameras, and for the first time he looked cornered. He recovered instantly by leaning into a fence. You're trespassing, Derek snapped. All of you. This is private property. Eli didn't blink. We're on the public access edge and we'll stay there. We notified law enforcement. We're not here for a fight. Derek's nostrils flared. He looked around like he expected police to appear and sweep the riders away. When none did, his confidence thinned. He turned his attention back to Katie, because bullies always go for the easiest target. He shoved her bag toward her chest hard enough to make her stumble. There, he said. Take your junk. Katie grabbed it, hands shaking. Derek held the reboot sheet in the other hand. But this, he said, waving it, this stays with me. Company document. It's not a company document, Katie said, voice trembling but louder now. It's a note I printed from our system. It's the truth. Derek's eyes narrowed into slits. The truth is you're done here. He pointed toward the showroom doors. Turn in your keys. Go. Katie's mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes glistened, not from weakness, from fury she didn't know she had. Mason took a slow breath. Don't do this, he said to Derek. You're making it worse. Derek's laughter came sharp. Worse? You want worse? He lifted his voice so the onlookers and cameras would catch every word. This man is not a veteran. He's a drifter. He's been harassing my staff. He stole from a donation box meant for real heroes. And now he's brought a gang to my business. Some of the onlookers nodded automatically, grateful for a simple narrative. Others looked uncertain, eyes flicking between Mason's calm posture and Derek's showmanship. Eli's voice cut in, steady. He is a veteran. Derek snapped his head. Oh yeah? How do you know? Eli didn't raise his voice. Because I'm alive because of him. A hush fell that even the road noise couldn't fill. Derek's smile twitched. That's, he started, but the words didn't land right. It sounded like a lie, and he knew it. A woman rider stepped forward behind Eli and held up a small laminated card, a legal letterhead. We have counsel, she said calmly. We're requesting preservation of all security footage, logs and vendor records from the last 72 hours. Any deletion after this moment will be documented as spoliation. Derek blinked. The word spoliation hit him like a foreign language with teeth. You can't just, he started. We can, the woman said, and we are, right now. She held her phone up and tapped send, screen reflecting in the sunlight like a blade. Derek's gaze flicked to his office door, to the service bay, to the donation box in the lobby, like he was mentally counting all the places his lies lived. Then, from inside the showroom, Tina appeared near the reception desk, arms crossed, eyes sharp. She leaned toward Derek through the open door and hissed something Mason couldn't hear, but he saw Derek's posture change. Not anger. Urgency. Derek turned back to the riders and forced his smile wider. This is ridiculous, he said loudly. If you want to donate, the box is right there. If you want to support veterans, come Saturday. We're hosting the Freedom Ride. He pointed to the banner. Support our heroes. Then he looked right at Mason. You want work? I'll give you work, Derek said, voice dripping with mock generosity. Get on your knees and apologize to my staff for harassing them, and I'll let you mop the service bay, for free. The onlookers gasped, some in shock, some in guilty delight. Mason's chest tightened, not because of humiliation, because he understood the tactic. Derek was trying to provoke him into anger. Quietly, no, just that. No performance quietly, no, just that. No performance, no pleading. Derek's smile cracked into fury. Then get out of here. Mason didn't move. Pay me what you owe me, he said, voice clear. And stop stealing from your own donation box. That line cut through the crowd. Stealing? Someone repeated. Derek's face sharpened. You have no proof. Mason's eyes flicked toward the counter inside where the donation box sat. Count it, he said, in front of everyone, right now, and show where it goes. Derek's jaw clenched hard enough to show muscle. He glanced toward Tina again. Tina's expression turned tight, because Mason didn't know the exact number. But Derek did. And Derek knew what would happen if the public count didn't match the number Derek planned to announce on Saturday. Sirens rose in the distance, this time closer. Derek's eyes lit with relief. Finally, he muttered, a police cruiser rolled into the lot, then another. Officers stepped out, hands near belts, scanning the riders like they were waiting for one wrong move. The lead officer approached Derek first because that's how power worked. Derek stepped forward, shoulders squared, voice instantly righteous. Officer, thank you, they're harassing my business. This is intimidation. The officer's eyes moved across the crowd, landing on Mason, then on Eli, then on the cameras. Anyone been threatened? The officer asked. Derek opened his mouth. Eli spoke first. Calm. No threats, no contact. We're recording. We're requesting preservation of evidence. We're standing on the public edge. The officer frowned slightly, like he didn't enjoy being forced into neutrality. Derek snapped, They're a gang. Eli lifted his hands, palms out. We're witnesses. The officer looked between them, then at Mason. You, he said to Mason. Aren't you the one we arrested yesterday? Mason held the officer's gaze. Yes. You're back here? I'm not on your property, Mason said, and I'm not here to fight. The officer's jaw tightened. Then why are you here? Mason's voice stayed steady. Because he called me a fake veteran on camera, and because he framed me. Derek scoffed loudly. Here we go. The officer rubbed his face once, frustrated. All right, everyone calm down. Mr. Vance, if you want them removed, you can file... A shout cut from the crowd of onlookers near the entrance. Wait, aren't you the guy who saved Tom Hensley? Heads turned. A woman stepped forward, phone in hand, eyes wide. My sister's married to Tom, she said loudly. He's alive because of that man right there. She pointed at Mason. The officer's eyes flicked to Mason again, uncertain now. Derek's face went pale for half a second, because the narrative was slipping. And from the service bay door behind Derek, someone rolled out a cart piled with glossy Freedom Ride merchandise, shirts, flags, branded decals, like Derek was trying to drown truth in marketing. Mason watched the cart, then looked at Derek. Do the count, Mason said again. Derek's smile returned, strained. Gladly, he said, too fast. He spun and marched into the showroom, heading straight for the donation box, and Katie, standing near the reception desk, saw Tina step subtly into Derek's path, whispering urgently, shaking her head. Mason's eyes narrowed. Because Tina wasn't warning Derek about the crowd, she was warning him about the money. Derek didn't walk to the donation box like a man about to prove his innocence. He walked like a man about to control a stage. He pushed through the showroom doors with the lead officer half a step behind him, the officer's radio crackling as if it might need to become an excuse. Tina flanked Derek's shoulder, whispering fast. Derek, don't, she hissed. Derek didn't look at her. He kept smiling, wide and bright, as if the cameras outside were still on him even through the glass. Everybody relax, Derek said loudly to the onlookers gathering inside the showroom now. Customers, employees, a couple of townspeople who'd wandered in because noise is always a magnet. We have nothing to hide. We're proud of our Veterans Fund. That's why we're doing the Freedom Ride. Outside, Mason stood at the public edge with Eli and the riders, watching through the glass like he was looking at an aquarium where predators thought they were safe. Katie was inside. Mason could see her near the counter, chin lifted, eyes wet but steady. Derek had fired her 10 seconds ago, but she hadn't left. Not yet. Not while Derek still held the story. The officer inside pointed at the box. Go ahead, he said. Count it. Derek placed both hands on the clear acrylic like it was sacred. Gladly, he said. Then he looked up at the people inside the showroom and added, and for the record, this is exactly why we don't tolerate scammers. They try to take advantage of good people, but we protect our community. He unlocked the box. The click sounded too loud. He tipped it, and the cash slid out in neat folds. Tina moved to help stack it, fingers fast, eyes darting like she wanted to make the numbers behave. Katie's voice cut in, trembling but sharp. Count what was in there last night, too. Derek's head snapped. Katie, you are done here. Katie didn't back down. Count it and show the deposit receipt. Show where it goes. A murmur rolled through the small crowd inside. Derek's smile tightened. We will, he said quickly. We always do. He started stacking bills into piles of 20 like he'd done it 1,000 times. Tina counted under her breath, trying to match Derek's pace. 100, 200, 3. Ray stepped into the showroom from the service bay, drawn by the commotion. He stopped near the doorway, arms at his sides, face hard. He watched Tina's hands. He watched Derek's, and something in his jaw worked like he was biting down on words he'd swallowed too many times. The officer leaned closer. How much is it? Derek didn't look up. We'll know in a second, Tina whispered urgently, low enough that only Derek could hear. It's not enough. Derek's fingers paused for a fraction. His eyes flicked toward her, sharp. Tina's lips barely moved. If you announce Saturday's number and this doesn't match... Derek's mouth twitched. He recovered instantly, louder. We're at... He paused dramatically as if suspense made the number more meaningful. We're at 1,300. It sounded confident. It sounded official. It sounded wrong. Because outside, one of the riders, Doc, had already done something nobody in the showroom realized. She'd called Tom Hensley's hospital room an hour ago and gotten his sister-in-law's statement on speaker. She had the timestamp. She had the paramedic unit number. She had the run report request submitted. And more importantly, she had a list of people who'd donated at the counter over the last 2 weeks. Because Frank had quietly asked around, and folks in town had bragged about dropping 100 in the box at Vance Motors. The math in Doc's head didn't land anywhere near 1,300. Eli leaned closer to Mason, voice low. He's undercounting. Mason didn't answer. His eyes stayed on Derek. Because Mason wasn't watching the money anymore. He was watching Derek's behavior, the small tension in his shoulders, the way he kept himself between Tina and the door to his office, the way his eyes flicked every few seconds toward the hallway like he was thinking about something else, something he needed to move before someone asked for it. Katie took one step forward. That's not what Tina counted last night, she said, voice shaking. You did a pre-count. Every head turned to Tina. Tina's eyes widened. Derek's smile snapped into something colder. Katie is disgruntled. She's been making mistakes all week. She's trying to sabotage Saturday. Katie's jaw trembled. You fired me because I printed a system note. The officer frowned. What system note? Derek lifted the reboot paper that he'd stolen from Katie's bag and waved it like it was nonsense. This, he said. She's obsessed with a DVR reboot. Our system rebooted after an emergency. That's it. Ray's eyes narrowed. Our system doesn't reboot on its own, he muttered. Derek shot him a look. Ray, not now. Ray didn't look away. It doesn't, he repeated louder. The officer turned his head toward Ray. You work here? Ray hesitated, then nodded. Shop foreman. You're saying the reboot is unusual? The officer asked. Ray swallowed. I'm saying Derek doesn't like cameras when they don't like him. The showroom fell quiet. Derek's smile froze. Tina's face went white. Katie stared at Ray like she couldn't believe he'd finally spoken. Derek's voice dropped into a dangerous calm. Ray, you want to keep your job? Ray's hands tightened. I want to keep people from dying in my bays, he said, and the words came out like a confession. There was gas on the floor yesterday, by the heater, near welding. The officer's head snapped toward him. Gas on the floor? Ray nodded once. This man, he jerked his chin toward the glass, toward Mason outside, stopped it before it became a fire. A murmur rose in the showroom, not the eager murmur from earlier. This one carried fear. Derek's voice sharpened. It was a minor spill. Ray stepped forward, eyes on Derek. It was a trail. Derek's jaw clenched. Watch your mouth. Ray's gaze didn't drop. Or what? You'll plant money on me too? That line cracked something. A woman near the door whispered, He planted it? The officer lifted a hand. All right, he said, louder now. Everyone calm down. Derek's voice jumped in immediately, trying to seize control. Officer, this is getting out of hand. These bikers are outside stirring up the town. My staff is being harassed. I want them removed. The officer's eyes flicked through the glass to the riders, dozens visible now. More arriving at the diner lot down the road, engines silent, bikes parked in disciplined rows. Then the officer looked back at Derek, at the cash piles, at the reboot note, at Ray's rigid posture, at Katie's pale face. His jaw tightened like he could feel his own career balancing between the easy route and the right one. "I'm not removing anyone who hasn't broken a law," the officer said, "and right now I've got an allegation of theft, an allegation of evidence destruction, and a report of a hazardous spill." Derek's eyes widened in outrage. Evidence destruction? That's insane. The officer held the reboot note between two fingers. "You rebooted your DVR immediately after an incident involving this man. And you're telling me your cameras were down yesterday when he was accused. That's a pattern." Derek leaned in, voice hard. "You're accusing me?" "I'm saying I need to verify," the officer replied, "which means I'm asking you right now to preserve any footage, logs, and vendor access records." Derek's lips pressed together. His eyes flicked to Tina again. Quick, silent communication. Tina's throat bobbed. She shook her head slightly. Derek's gaze shifted toward his office hallway like he was weighing a run. Mason saw it through the glass. He didn't move. But Eli did. Eli lifted his phone and spoke clearly, loud enough for the lot, for the crowd, for any microphone to catch. "Officer," Eli called through the glass, "we have counsel on the way with a formal preservation letter. Also, we've already contacted the security vendor. Their access logs can't be erased from inside that building." Derek's head snapped toward the sound like it was a gunshot. His smile vanished completely. For the first time, Derek Vance looked like a man who realized the room was no longer his. The officer turned toward the front doors, gaze hardening. "Mr. Vance," he said, "step away from the counter." Derek didn't move. He stared at the piles of cash, at the thinness of them, at the eyes on him, at the lie collapsing. Then, in a smooth motion that looked like confidence but wasn't, Derek scooped the reboot note, shoved it into his pocket, and said loudly, "This is harassment. This is a witch hunt." He backed toward the hallway. The officer stepped after him. "Sir, stop." Derek's voice rose. "I'm calling my attorney." He turned, and Mason watched, through glass and distance, the exact second Derek decided to do what men like him always do when the truth is finally close enough to touch. He ran. He bolted down the hallway toward his office like he was going to grab something, something that could either save him or destroy him. The officer shouted, "Stop!" Two officers lunged after him. Tina screamed, "Derek!" Katie stood frozen, eyes wide. Ray swore under his breath and started moving too, not toward Derek, but toward the service bay, toward something he suddenly feared Derek might try to hide. Outside, Mason's body went rigid, because he knew what Derek was going for. Not the reboot note, not the cash, the envelope on the desk, the spreadsheet, the proof of where the donation money really went. And as the chaos inside began to surge, the sound on the road outside changed. A deeper rumble, not a few bikes, not a couple dozen. A wall of engines coming closer, so many that the air itself seemed to vibrate. Mason turned his head slowly toward the street, and his breath caught, because the next wave wasn't just more riders, it was a horizon of headlights. The first thing Mason noticed wasn't the number of bikes, it was the silence between them. A long line of headlights rolled toward Vance Motors, filling the road like a slow-moving river of white light. Engines rumbled low, controlled, not revving for attention, just present. Undeniable. The sound pressed against the dealership glass and made the banner inside flutter like it wanted to tear itself down. 550 Harleys, not a stunt, not a rumor, not internet exaggeration. They turned into the access road in disciplined waves, guided by hand signals, pulling in without blocking emergency lanes, without cutting across sidewalks. Riders dismounted and stepped aside as more bikes filed in behind them, parking in clean formation like they'd rehearsed this their whole lives. Because in a way, they had. Outside, people gathered on both sides of the lot, customers, employees, neighbors, drivers who abandoned their cars half a block away to see what could possibly be happening. Phones rose like a field of antennae. Mason stood at the public edge, shoulders squared, face empty of celebration. He watched the bikes roll in and felt something twist in his chest, part gratitude, part fear, part disbelief that his life had become a scene nobody could ignore. Eli walked up beside him, helmet under his arm. "They're here," Eli said quietly. Mason didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the showroom hallway visible through the glass, where Derek had just sprinted toward his office, and where officers were now chasing him with radios crackling and boots hammering tile. Inside, the dealership stopped being a stage and became a panic room. Derek slammed his office door, locked it, and yanked open a drawer. Papers flew. He grabbed the manila envelope, the one Katie had glimpsed, and shoved it into a leather briefcase like it was cash from a robbery. The door shook with a hit. "Derek Vance!" the officer barked. "Open the door!" Derek's voice came through, too loud, too fast. "I'm on the phone with my attorney. You can't—" Another hit, louder. Ray appeared in the hallway, face grim. He didn't join the pounding. He pivoted toward the service bay instead, because his instincts were screaming that Derek wasn't only trying to protect himself, he was trying to erase the thing that could bury him. Ray pushed into the service area and stopped. A mechanic was standing by the welding station, pale, pointing at the floor. The fuel trail was back, fresh, longer this time, not a spill, a line. Ray's throat tightened. "Kill power," he snapped. A tech reached for the breaker. Ray grabbed a fire extinguisher with both hands, eyes sweeping the shop for sources. Heater, sparks, outlets. His heart hammered with the knowledge that someone had just tried to set a trap in a building full of people. A trap Derek would never admit existed. Outside, the last of the bikes parked. Engines shut off in sequence, one after another, until the lot fell into a heavy, unnatural quiet. Then, as one, 550 riders took a step forward, not toward the doors, not toward the employees, toward Mason. They formed two lines, opening a corridor in the lot, boots aligned, shoulders squared, faces solemn. No cheers, no chants, no threats, only the sound of jackets creasing and gravel crunching under weight. Mason's mouth went dry. He started to shake his head like he could deny what was happening by refusing to accept it. Eli touched his elbow. "Boss," he said softly, "just stand." Mason stepped forward into the corridor like a man walking into a courtroom. And then it happened. The lead group, men and women of different ages, different clubs, different patches, stopped at the same distance and raised their hands. Not the casual wave of bikers, a formal salute, sharp, clean, unmistakable. 550 Harleys saluted a homeless veteran in the parking lot of a dealership that had called him a fake. The crowd watching made a sound like air, leaving lungs. Some people cried without understanding why. A few people covered their mouths. Phones trembled in hands as they recorded a moment that didn't need editing to feel real. Mason's eyes burned. He kept his chin level anyway, returning the salute with a hand that barely wanted to lift, like he was afraid if he moved wrong the whole thing would vanish. Inside the showroom, Katie saw it through the glass and put her hand over her mouth. Tears slid down her face without permission. And Derek Vance, still barricaded in his office, heard the silence change outside. Not louder, bigger, like the world had gathered itself around a truth he couldn't bully anymore. The officer slammed the office door again. "Last warning," Derek's voice cracked. "You have no right—" The lock finally gave. The door burst inward, and officers poured in. Derek stumbled back, clutching the briefcase like it was his lifeline. "Put it down," the officer shouted. Derek raised both hands, briefcase still in one. "This is a misunderstanding." An officer grabbed the briefcase. Derek jerked it back instinctively. That was enough. They took him, pinned him against the wall, wrists behind his back, cuffs clicking on with the same cold finality Mason had felt the day before. Derek's face twisted. "This is insane. They're intimidating me. They're—" "Shut up," Caldwell's voice cut in from the hallway. Caldwell stepped into the office, eyes scanning fast, envelope edges peeking from the briefcase, cash, spreadsheets. His jaw tightened. He opened the briefcase. The manila envelope slid out. Inside, donation tallies, pre-count numbers, sponsor pledges, and a typed distribution sheet that didn't list any charity accounts, just transfers into an account tied to a Shell LLC. Vance Community Outreach, a clean name to hide dirty movement. Caldwell looked up. "Where's your charity registration for this?" he asked flatly. Derek's mouth opened and closed. That's Those are internal. Caldwell didn't blink. Internal fraud, he said. Then Caldwell's gaze shifted to the reboot note in Derek's pocket. An officer pulled it out, placed it on the desk like a final nail. Caldwell turned to Derek, voice low and absolute. You rebooted your DVR after an emergency and then claimed cameras were down when you accused a man of theft. That's obstruction at minimum. Derek's face went gray. Outside, Doc stepped up to the glass doors and held up her phone. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. She played Derek's own posted video, his calm voice calling Mason a fake veteran and a scammer, next to a time-stamped paramedic report confirmation and the officer's release paperwork that proved Mason wasn't a suspect with a confession. 2 stories. One true, one convenient. The crowd didn't need a jury. They just needed to stop looking away. The lead officer walked out with Caldwell and 2 other officers, Derek cuffed between them, face twisted into disbelief that the world had dared to change around him. The doors opened. Cold air rushed in, and the lot, packed with riders, townspeople, phones, held its breath. Caldwell spoke first, loud enough to cut through the crowd without turning it into a speech. Derek Vance is being detained for investigation into fraud, false reporting, and obstruction, he said. Everyone stay back and stay calm. Derek tried to speak, but his voice got swallowed by the sheer weight of eyes on him. As they led him past the donation banner, someone in the crowd said quietly, "So he was the thief." Another voice, louder, "He framed that man." Derek's knees buckled for half a second, and an officer tightened his grip to keep him upright, because even a villain gets carried through the process. Mason stepped forward 1 pace, staying out of the officer's way. Derek saw him. Hatred flashed across Derek's face. He leaned toward Mason, voice ragged, trying for one last stab. "You're nothing," Derek hissed. "You're still nothing." Mason looked at him for a long second. Then he said, quiet enough that Derek heard it and the crowd didn't need to. "I asked for work," Mason said. "You chose cruelty." Derek's face contorted, but there was nothing left to threaten with, no room left to spin. They put Derek into the cruiser. The door shut. And for the first time in days, Mason felt something in his chest loosen. Not victory, not revenge. Relief. Katie walked out of the showroom, still clutching her bag like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. She stopped in front of Mason, eyes wet, voice breaking. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I should have—" Mason shook his head once. "You did," he said. "When it mattered." She swallowed. "I got fired." Eli stepped in, calm. "You got hired," he said, and nodded toward the riders. "By people who mean what they say." Katie blinked, confused. Doc stepped forward with a business card and a folded sheet. "Employment contacts, legal support, and if your name gets dragged online, we document that too." Katie's hands trembled as she took it. Frank moved closer, eyes shining. "Told you," he said to Katie softly. "Family shows up." Mason looked at the corridor of bikes and riders again. He felt the urge to shrink from it, to insist he didn't deserve it, but the salute still hung in the air like a truth you couldn't deny. Eli lifted his chin slightly, indicating the head of the formation. "They want you up front," he said. Mason's throat tightened. "For what?" Eli's voice softened. "To leave." Mason stared. "I'm not a leader anymore." Eli shook his head. "You never stopped being one. You just got tired." Mason swallowed hard. He stepped forward. Riders parted without a word, opening the corridor again. Mason walked through it slowly, boots crunching gravel, and every face he passed held the same message. You are not forgotten. At the front of the formation, Eli rolled Mason's own bike toward him. It wasn't a new bike. It wasn't polished. It was a used Harley, simple, solid, already titled and insured. Mason stared at it like it was impossible. Eli held out a key. "No charity," Eli said quietly. "It's work. You'll help us with the Foundation's shop program. You teach, you wrench, you get paid. You want dignity? Earn it the way you always did. With your hands." Mason's fingers closed around the key. His hand trembled once. "Where do we go?" Mason asked, voice rough. Eli looked down the road. "Out," he said, then forward. Mason swung a leg over the bike and sat. The seat felt real. The weight felt real, like the world had remembered him. He looked back once at the dealership, the banner, the glass, the place that had tried to crush him with a smile. Then he looked ahead. Eli raised his hand. Engines ignited in sequence, 1, then 10, then 100, then 500, until the air turned into thunder. And before Mason twisted the throttle, he leaned forward just slightly and spoke into the noise, not to the crowd, not to cameras, just to the moment. "I didn't want money," he said. "I wanted work." Then he rode. 550 Harleys rolled behind him like a salute that wouldn't fade, leaving Vance Motors shrinking in the mirrors, small, quiet, powerless, while the road ahead opened wide enough for a man to exist again.